We talked a lot about Christine Banfield, but there was another victim here, Joseph Ryan. I had the opportunity to go down to Florida and speak with his mother. I'd love you to listen to some of our conversation.
I am Joseph Ryan's mother.
Why don't you tell me a little bit about Joseph? Who was Joseph?
Wow. Joseph was a good person, a good man. He was most of all intelligent and funny. He was a funny person. He was somebody who was very passionate about many things. And he was articulate and a talker. He was civically minded. So he knew about what was going on. He was very liberal. And I believe, even though he didn't use this word, he was a feminist. He was somebody who believed in women's rights and safety for women. He was an advocate for women in different things, in different areas. He spoke out publicly for the safety of women. And he helped women in the same way that I have in my life against abuse and violence. So people may not know that about Joe, but I have stories, and proof of this, of his character. Joe was very liberal. He was a Bernie Sanders fan. And he believed in things like social justice. He was passionate about those things. He was a supporter of LGBTQ rights. He didn't have a racist bone in his body, and he was an animal lover. He was always somebody who he would go to like a pound or a animal rescue place and ask for the ugliest, oldest dog that was little, because he preferred a little one so he could take it with him all the time. So Joe always had little dogs. So there's pictures of him on the internet, I'm sure, of little dogs and him. And he would, he loved them passionately and took them every place, and he liked them more than people, And he liked cats and other animals. He was a farmer. He planted things in his, he lived with his grandmother before he died, and he had ripped up all her grass and planted flowers and vegetables. And he also worked as a farmer in different places, and also planting things and harvesting, but also animals, goats and things. And so he was very outdoorsy, unlike myself, I don't know where he got that from. And he was athletic. He was extremely athletic. He did mixed martial arts, jujitsu, and he taught sometimes little children jujitsu for, just to be nice. He didn't do it for money, but his passion was mixed martial arts as much as anything, and he was a fitness kind of person. Like, it's something that meant a lot to him, and always nagging me to eat healthier. He was a health nut who sometimes was a vegetarian, but he stopped being that in his later years. And he also was somebody who believed in family a lot, and he would often work as a caregiver for those family members or for other people. So he took care of his grandfather, who was like a father to him. Here in Florida, he came down and he took care of him while he had, before he died, when he had senility. He was senile, and Joe came and took care of him. And Joe took care of me when I had cancer. He came here, I was bald, and he took me to appointments, and he cooked and he cleaned for me. And he was always there when I was sick, and I had cancer twice, so he came twice. And he lived with his grandmother before he died, and throughout his life he would sometimes live with his grandmother, or often he did, and try and help her as best he could. She had some health issues, or has some health issues, and I'm not saying he was the best caregiver in the world, but he tried, he loved, he was committed to that. He had for a time he was in a relationship with a woman, and she had a hysterectomy, and he drove to New York and he took care of her for over a month and took care of her daughter, and because that's who he was. He took care of people who needed him. And you know, I could go on and say many things about him, but that's kind of a start as to some of the things he was. But he was also a person that, for me personally, he called me all the time. We had these long discussions. He would text me first, and he'd say, "Are you busy? I'm going to call in 5 minutes." And I text him back and say, "Call me." And he'd say, "Kanye West, let's discuss." And then I'd pick up the phone and he wanted to talk about Kanye West for a while. Or, Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. And so we'd discuss it. We were both on the Johnny Depp side. And he lived near the courthouse where his trial is going to be. And he sent me a photo that he walked over to the courthouse and he stood in front of it, took a photo for me, and texted it to me. This is the same courthouse his trial will be filmed in. And, Joe and I had this thing where we would talk about famous cases. And he would like that his trial is going to be in public view, and that he mattered to people. He would want those people tried for their crimes against him. And he was, he was a true crime buff. So that's another unusual thing. He would be into it. And those are, just some of the kinds of things I shared with him. I don't think everybody gets to have a close relationship with their grown son, where their son calls them all the time and wants to talk for hours into the night. But I was fortunate. I got to know Joe as an adult and as a teenager in a way that most mothers don't. And the loss that I experienced from that is beyond belief. I lost my greatest cheerleader and one of my closest friends. That's what those people took from me.
When you think back to Joe as a child, what stands out for you when you think of those memories of him growing up? Because you're from Northern Virginia, he's from Northern Virginia, right? Is that where he was born, raised?
He was born in Woodbridge, Virginia, in Prince William County. It was 2 days before Christmas. He was my Christmas baby. I was 16 at the time, so I was very young and not prepared to be a mother. And Joe was such a cute baby and a smart baby. He talked really young. And he was very physical. And I remember when I remember when he was just a baby and he learned how to speak remarkably young because he was smart and just had good language skills. And I remember sitting there, and he wasn't even one yet. He was sitting on a stack of phone books, and my mother was walking back and forth in the dining room, and Joe was sitting there, and he had sniffles, and he's not one yet. And he looks at my mother and says, "Grandmom, may I have a tissue, please?" And my mom and I were just shocked because he's not one yet, and he said a sentence. And of course she laughed and got him a tissue, and we were like, gosh, like Joe was pretty remarkable. He was a remarkable baby and child. He excelled in sports of all different kinds. He was raised by his father. Much to my horror about that, his father passed. And, Joe's life was not easy. It was actually quite broken between a father and a mother who didn't love each other anymore. It was a high school romance, and so Joe had many parents in his life. He had a grandmother who loved him, who eventually he lived with. He had a grandfather that came in and out of his life that he saw more as a father figure. He had me, and he had several stepmothers. So he did have people that loved him, but we didn't love each other very much. And we weren't, they weren't necessarily supportive of me as a mother for Joe. And that's okay for me to say. And they may say something different, but I know the reality of that, And Joe's life was, he was financially taken care of by that side of the family because I was a young mother who was not given the opportunities to be able to care for my son in ways that I would have wanted for him. I didn't have power or control in his life. So I was able to be a presence for him as much as possible. But not being the parent that has no power, you just kind of have to, I just had to support him the best I could emotionally and wait for him to get older, for him to realize, and he did, how much I loved him and how sorry I was that I couldn't protect him from difficult things in his life. But there were great moments in his childhood. I'm very sure of that, but he didn't live an easy life with his broken family. He didn't. But I don't know what else to say about that, except, the one thing I will say about Joe is he was a very playful person. He began to do this he always played games of all sorts of, sports, but he did unusual kind of role play games constantly. And as a teenager, he began to do this LARPing thing where it's these teenagers and grown men and women that dress up in ridiculous foam, like weird outfits, and have foam weapons that they create. And they run around in the woods and they battle each other in a fictional way. They have whole giant, it's a big thing. It's LARPing. And there's and Joe was a famous LARPer. His name was Korak, spelled with a K. And he was active in this giant community of LARPers. And he would get dressed up in these ridiculous outfits and have ridiculous, they had like festivals. And I was told that in more recent years, when he did this, he had a giant rubber fish that he would use as the weapon. So he'd run through the forest with these guys and these women and hit people with a giant rubber fish.
That is quite a visual.
Yes. And so he always was, he was kind of, not kind of, he was silly, but he was dramatic. So he was all about like getting dressed up in ridiculous things in public. He would do this not just for the LARPing thing. And I have this thing too. A whole group of us got dressed up in absurd outfits and went to Walmart, you know, and Joe was wearing a baby bonnet and some outfit. And we all were wearing ridiculous outfits and interacting with the people at Walmart. And that's who Joe was. Like, he was the first person to, in high school, he wore a dress to school. Just his grandmother's dress, just for the fun of it, because he wanted to show that he could wear that dress to school. Now, Joe wasn't a transvestite, but he thought that was fun.
All right. So it's, I think you've given a really good kind of picture of who he was. Talk to me about February of 2023. Talk to me about that day, where you were. Do you remember that day?
So I didn't get to know the day that Joe was murdered. The family didn't tell me, or the police, that Joe had died and been killed. I had to wait a day and a half before I got to know my son was dead. So I'm feeling a little angry and upset about that still today. I remember when I got the call from the detective, the lead detective, lead detective Kyle Bryant. He called me and he told me that my son had been killed and he had been shot. I don't know if he said shot immediately, and I just know when he told me that I could hear my own voice screaming. And I remember that moment, and I remember where I was sitting, and I remember his words. But it was almost like I was outside of my body hearing that he had been killed, and so the officer, the detective, was very kind, and he tried to be informative, and he tried to begin to tell the story. And of course, to begin with, I didn't understand the story. Joe had texted me the night before he was killed, and it was a stupid texting conversation. And he sent me a couple pictures, and I remembered that, that I had just spoken to Joe. And so as the story unfolded, I was, you're just in shock. I was just in shock. And I believed it, and I understood, but of course, as I knew instantly that Joe was not involved in some way with this woman's death, with Christine Banfield's death.
You watched the initial press conference with
Right.
police. What was your reaction to that initial press conference with the Fairfax County Police?
So my initial reaction was, I watched carefully, and I watched a few times, and the police chief, is that what he's called?
Chief Davis? I'm not sure
Chief
who was
Davis.
speaking at the press conference,
There
but I
was
think
a woman
he was.
and I think him. And he was pretty respectful and always named two victims. There were two victims. And he indicated things like Brandon did not want to give testimony. He did not want to be questioned by the police. Well, that's pretty damning. information. You know, if your wife is murdered, then you give testimony. You help out in the case. You don't refuse. You don't lawyer up. There's a reason you lawyer up, and from the start, you could just see it in the police officers or the chief, that there were holes in this, that clearly the story that Brendan tells and the nanny tells, or au pair, Juliana, clearly they're telling us a lie. I knew it was not true. Joe never would have gone there with the intention of killing a woman or raping her. That's not a thing. Joe was never violent with women. I don't care if it was a role play thing or not. That he was never violent. You don't wake up at 39 and decide, okay, I've never been violent with women in my entire life. Now I'm going to stab a woman to death. That's not reasonable. That's not possible. And I knew him. Of course I knew him. So I knew it was a lie. So when I saw the press conference, and of course I got ridiculous. There was a flood of reporting that was horrible and that suggested or implicated that my son had done something wrong or that he was this creepy fetish guy. Well, that's a lie. That's not who he was. He was a consenting adult, yes, but that's not who he was. He wasn't a violent man who hurt women. I knew that was a lie. Yet people were saying contrary to that, including, news reporters and all kinds of people writing articles that were lies, that were not about suggesting Joe was an incel. Sorry, that's not who he was. Or suggesting he was some kind of drug addict or mentally ill. I could say very angry words about the way the press handled that. It was horrible. Top down, from Nancy Grace to Court TV. They did a terrible job. And I'm angry. They were lazy in their work. Talking about my son and possibly affecting what could happen in the trial, public opinion does matter. And what they said wasn't acceptable. So,
obviously, we've spoken about this.
right.
Talk to me in the way you're most comfortable about what his role was when it came to sexual fetish websites. I know you were very close. Did he ever talk to you about involvement in websites like that?
Yes. So Joe was a person who was often polyamorous in his life, meaning he maintained multiple relationships frequently throughout his life. And he actually wasn't casual about partners. He preferred long-term partners, and he was frequently in love. Not frequently, but he was normal too, He could be vanilla. And but what he was into was sometimes consensual BDSM. And not just that, he did some other things, but it was role play. It wasn't that's a consensual thing. And people that belong to those kinds of things, they in fact are more careful, not less. So they go into it knowing somewhat what they're going to do, and they have rules, and they respect those rules. So, that is something he took part in. And we discussed it. He was open about it. It wasn't something he was ashamed of and hid. And so, you know, as a mother, you want to protect your son and you want him to be careful. And we had discussions about the carefulness of doing those things. And Joe was not careful enough, but he was tricked. That's what I'll say about that. And many of us, many adults, are very comfortable doing all kinds of things in their sex life. And, you know, you wouldn't have a book of, 50 Shades of Grey? You know, that's popular because people enjoy sexual play, role play. And just like Joe was a LARPer, or he did other things, he did those things. And it's not different than he wanted to buy a superhero costume and be Batman while having sex. Sorry. That was fun for him. And he didn't need to apologize for that. And he didn't need to die for that. And he doesn't need to be judged for that in his afterlife.
What do you want people to know who are hearing you say that and they are passing judgment? What do you want them to know and think about before they pass judgment?
I want them to look in the mirror. That's what I want. If they have issues, they're their issues. And maybe they're ashamed of their own sexual desires. Sorry if anybody can make choices in a consensual way to do just what they want to do. And that's what Joe would say.
When was the first time you heard the name Christine Banfield?
I heard it, when the lead detective called me. So that's the first time I had heard. He didn't tell me he was embarking on this relationship with her, but he told friends that. So that is out there, and that will come up in court. There's no doubt about it. I couldn't speak about this earlier because I can't have it affect the trial in any way. But he told people he believed he was going into a consensual relationship that both Christine and Brendan knew about. It was supposed, he told people about it. So there is proof out there that Joe thought the husband was on board with this. So it was total entrapment.
Had he spoken to Brendan before?
No, he had not.
So his communication had only been
He
with...
believed that it was Christine. Okay. But the fact of the matter is, it was likely never Christine, that she never knew about this in any way. That it was Brendan himself, that he created a profile for his wife that he intended to murder her. And the nanny, the au pair, Juliana, spoke to Joe on the phone as Christine.
How do you know that?
I know that because
You've been informed on it.
I've been informed.
That conversation you had the night before, what was that about?
The conversation, he sent me a picture of himself during COVID. He had gained some weight and he didn't look good. And he was sitting there playing video games. And he sent me this picture. And then he sent me a picture of himself looking in the mirror with his shirt off, making a muscle. He had transformed himself, lost weight, and got in shape. And he felt really good. And he was telling me that. He was really proud of himself from going from COVID and being depressed and heavy to this guy who was really fit. And I made jokes about it. And I said, "You're showing me a picture of you in boxers." And he said, "No, Mom, those are shorts." And we laughed. And that was it. That was unfortunate. But the thing is that he was really happy that night before he was killed. He was proud of himself and he was happy. And he was showing me the comparison of the depression, and then how good he felt about himself and how excited he was to, be alive and to be in shape and to be happy.
Did he mention to you at all what his plans were for the next day?
No, he did not.
When you heard the reports, as I'm sure you've heard at this point, that he allegedly brought a knife and restraints to the Banfield home, your reaction to that?
I didn't have a reaction to that at all, because Joe and I had discussed the idea of cutting and knife play. So that was a conversation we had about the past. Joe was not into knife, like cutting. He didn't like to create blood. He didn't actually he had only had one partner that had requested, there's a thing where it's kind of an edge play sort of, and they do small, things, but it's not brutal, and it's very careful. And I had said to him in the past, that's why I know about this specifically, that this was kind of out of character, right? Not that he brought a knife, but the idea of actually cutting a woman. Like, he could bring a knife and you just sort of act. You're not using that knife. You're just brandishing the knife. And it's not intended, it's role play. It's not the same thing. So we had discussed that in the past, and it wasn't a strange topic. It's like anything. But the cutting thing, I knew that was not his thing, because we specifically talked about that. So I don't know if in between when we talked about that, which was over the maybe 6 months before that, had he ever done that again? I think he hadn't done it again. So he only had one singular experience with this by request. So when he brought and I had told the lead detective about this, that was not Joe's thing. So when they say this in the press, and they talk about this as if Joe was some kind of weirdo that did these crazy things, it's not accurate. And it's not accurate. That wasn't his thing. And the other thing is, they talk about it like it's rough sex. They use that term. Rough sex means Joe would have been violent with women. And spanking somebody in a consensual way, to me, is not, in fact, rough sex. That's something many people do. I don't consider it rough. I consider it it's not, that's not a big deal. I know, whatever. It's hard to talk about.
For people that don't understand, that are not familiar with the term knife play, talk to me about the difference between knife play and stabbing someone. Is there a world in which those two are similar things?
No, there is not. So knife play can mean that you don't cut somebody in any way. Blood play or cutting is totally different. So it's three things. There's knife play, and it's just an object that you don't use. Maybe you press it against the skin or something, but you don't actually cut into somebody. And then there's actual blood play, where you intentionally, carefully cut, which is not the same thing. So the two words are not similar in any way. They're two different acts. And stabbing, the third thing, that's an act of violence, and that's stabbing. That's actual violence that is intended to harm.
And you don't believe he's capable of that?
He's never been capable of that. He has been assaulted by a woman, and he did not strike that woman back. He was physically assaulted by a woman and maced in the face. There are public records of that. Joe did not strike back. He did not even defend himself. He was a mixed martial artist who was a fierce competitor. If he wanted to harm any woman, He could have done it in a second. There's not a record of that because he never did that.
Yeah. There is a part in the body camera footage where she specifically says he was stabbing her. Brendan shot him. What was your reaction when you heard her say that he was stabbing her?
I knew it was a lie. And she also claimed that Brendan was a police officer when he wasn't. He was an officer for the IRS, which is not the same. It's not a peace officer. And so she elevated him to something that he wasn't. So she just made some ridiculous statements. And also she had no concern for the little girl. Not at all. They left her downstairs while they murdered the people upstairs. And she's doing the thing on the body cam where the police officers are asking her about the crime, and she's unconcerned about the little girl. I mean, totally. Well, you're the au pair, you know? And you're not concerned about Christine that is in the process of dying either. She was just the worst person who was, I mean, it was clear that she was lying. So I picked up on that, and I didn't doubt my son. I never doubted him. So I was just there watching it and not, you know, it was easy for me to be sort of strangely detached at the time because I knew it was a lie. And so her words didn't affect me. I just knew she was lying.
Obviously, she took a plea deal. She has agreed to testify against Brendan. What was your reaction when you found out that she had been given this deal to testify against him?
Well, we had a net meeting before it hit public, where the prosecution team approached me and let me know that they wanted to take the plea deal and that it was necessary to ensure Brendan would be found guilty. And so while it was horrifying, I felt as if Brendan needed to be found guilty for 2 counts of first-degree murder. And so it didn't hit, I was just kind of in a space where I was kind of intellectualizing the whole process, and I understood it. It wasn't until later that it hit me to the degree that it did later, that she would be given this manslaughter plea deal that was really too good to be true. And I agreed, and I understand why the deal had to be made. It needs to be. Brendan needs to go to prison for a really long time, and he needs to be found guilty. But do I believe that Juliana was equally guilty and should serve a vast amount of time? Yes. That's not going to happen unless she recants her story. So if she goes ahead and she is a credible witness, she will get a deal she doesn't deserve. She murdered Joe the same as he did. She planned it out, and she's a ruthless, sociopathic killer. And she deserves murder 1, 2 counts, in my opinion. But I'm going to be a good sport because I want Brendan to live his life in prison until he dies.
Is there a world in which you forgive the person who took your son?
Never. They don't deserve it. It's not necessary for me to move on. I'm not carrying this. Like, I will carry my son's life forever, and I miss him. But I don't forgive them. It's unforgivable what they did. They didn't care. They threw away his life. They murdered Christine. They didn't care about that little girl. There are very few murderers worse than these 2 people. What they did is beyond horrendous, and they did it not because they loved each other. It's not some romantic notion of killing somebody so you can be together. This was a man who killed his wife and my son for some kind of thrill. It had nothing to do with any other thing. There was no love between these two people. They had a sick, psychopathic relationship. Juliana wanted to live in this country and take over another woman's life. It's as simple as that. So, no, I'll never forgive them. Never. And I'll never wish a moment of peace on their life. And guess what? I'll go on. I'll be fine. I won't be resentful. I'll live a life. And I'll live a life that is happy because my son wanted that for me. And so that's what I'll do. But no forgiveness for them. Mm-mm.
I know that there's going to be a lot of attention on this trial. What are you most concerned about with that attention?
Well, for me, I want the world to see that Joe was a good person, that he had value, that he was not just that, that he had value, and that his life meant something. I want the Ryan family to have peace. I want his grandmother to be okay. She loved him dearly with all her heart. And this has been horrible for her. It's not okay. I want the people that loved Joe to continue to, have peaceful thoughts about him. And I think they will. And I want people to understand the things that Joe believed in have a kind of legacy. He was unusual in his beliefs and his way of life. But I want those, he would want those people to not be discriminated upon. That it's okay to authentically live your life and that you're not a bad person because you do that. That it's reasonable. And so those are the things that are important to me. And I believe in the end, it will be okay. That Joe's life will have meant something. And that people will see that he was a good person. And anything for myself, I'll be fine. I'll just be fine. And that's because I had a fabulous son that told me that I was a good mother and that he believed in me.
Do you believe that Christine Banfield was involved in your son's death?
I do not believe Christine Banfield was aware of anything or involved in anything. I believe that. So I think during the trial, they're going to try and make her involved. They need to. At least Brendan's lawyer will do that. The defense. But I think it's a lie. I think Christine didn't know. And Joe didn't know she didn't know. He thought he was dealing with her. So, my heart goes out to Christine's family. And I haven't had any contact with them. I have no intention of contacting them. I'm sure they're grieving and I'm sure it's terrible.
If they're watching this, what do you want them to know? What do you say to them?
Well, I want to say I'm sorry for your loss. I'm just sorry for your loss. It has to be terrible. I'm sorry that Brendan tricked you, tricked Christine. I can't apologize for Joe because Joe thought he was talking to Christine. And I hope they understand that. He thought he was doing the right thing. So I can't apologize for that because he thought it was the right thing to do. And I'm sure that they must have a lot of misgivings and a lot of pain over this. And I hope that the little girl grows up and gets to have Christine's family in her life and not Brendan's family. So I support Christine's family fully. And I've got nothing for the other families. the killers' families. So that's how that's how I feel about it. And I really am, everybody in Joe's family feels that way towards Christine's family. I'm very sure, we all are very empathetic, and, we feel very bad for her, and we feel very bad for us. We both are victims. So I just wish them the best, and I hope that they find peace.
I know one of the things that is going to come up is the forensic evidence. It's already been mentioned that there was a difference of opinions in who set up the website, kind of information back and forth between Christine and Joseph. What are your thoughts on the way things have been handled in terms of determining that forensic evidence and whether or not it was in fact Christine?
Well, the officer that one of the people on the teams for Fairfax police, the forensics team, but it specifically they're in any criminal case, you have many theories that happen. That's why it's a case. It's being investigated. And so it's important for a team to be open to other options. They don't just investigate one stream. That would be poor investigation. So the fact that one forensic person had one alternate idea about how that worked out, it doesn't support the entire case. It doesn't say anything about the entire case. They are supposed to legally check out all the options and investigate all the options, or they'd be bad at their job and justice wouldn't be served. So I'm aware that one singular officer who was backed up by a study from a university of students said one thing, which was Christine and Joe had contacted each other and actually been in touch. Well, that's one person, one study. And the study is from students at a university. I know that for a fact. Sorry, one person who had, I think, flawed judgment or information, and later on, it doesn't really matter. They can change their minds. They can do. There's a mountain of evidence, that was not Christine and Joe talking, that was Brendan and Juliana. And so the defense can claim this other thing and try and create something out of a nothing burger, but it's false and it's wrong. And there's a mountain of forensic evidence, not just about that, but about the body of my son being moved and many other things. So let's just be careful in any court scenario when we're looking at cases, and we all like to play these sort of judges and juries and do this sleuthing. The truth is that we need to be more aware of all the information and who really is the expert. And the expert is not this solo person who later on was proven wrong by the prosecution team. This would not be going to court after several years of collecting all this information and a witness who was at the murder and helped with the murders, unless it was true. There's a mountain of evidence. So go ahead, defense, say whatever you want. You're going to be proven wrong.
Obviously, you mentioned it yourself. There's a lot of people who are into true crime. Your son was one of them. What do you say to the people who are going to be watching this trial? What do you want them to remember as they watch this trial play out and hear all of these shocking things?
Pay attention to the details. And it's clear the motivation, just like the motivation is for Brendan to have done the killing along with Juliana, that Joe had no motivation for this crime. I mean, zero. And that Christine is likely to have never done anything extramarital in any way. That this is probably not at all, I mean, this just is not, they chose two victims and claimed that they were, you know, that Joe was the killer and Christine was this person she wasn't. And it doesn't fit the profile of the actual victims. They weren't to blame. And they're going to try and blame the victims. I don't think really true crime people are going to believe this. There was a point in which, for a year or more, that there were questions about this. As it goes forward and they see whatever defense puts out there, I believe there's not going to be a person that actually believes Brendan and Juliana didn't kill brutally my son, Joseph Ryan, and Christine Banfield. They're going to believe the truth, is what I think. And so I just say be aware and look at motive. Because the motive points to Brendan Banfield.
I know we've discussed this in the past, and you've said there are a number of reasons. We've spoken on the phone for years, but why did you want to make sure your son's name was more than just he's the other man who was killed? Why was it so important for you to make sure people knew who Joseph Ryan was?
Well, I always wanted to say something, but I needed to wait. I was asked to wait by the prosecution and by Fairfax police. So I always wanted to speak up, and I have spoken up incognito on message boards. I have been vocal, but I had to do it secretly because I didn't want to affect the case. So it's all because I didn't want to affect the case. I always wanted to shout. So it's close enough to the trial. I feel safe enough that I'm not going to negatively affect the trial. Afterwards, I will shout as loud as I can, as much as I can, about who my son was. And so will my friends and my family, my side of the family. We will speak up, and we will do it proudly. We are already planning to. There's a whole list of Joe friends that have spoken out for me and will continue to do it. But I had to be silent because I need Brendan to be found guilty. So that's my reason for silence, and only that.
Are you comfortable sharing? I know you won't be at the trial next week. Are you comfortable sharing why you won't be able to make it there?
Sure. So medically, I've gone through a transformation in the last year where I had many things going on with me that were physically not okay, health reasons. I'm a 2-time cancer survivor. I have diabetes and I have a heart condition. I have lower kidney disease. You know, I have other things. And I physically can't do a trial for a month. I just don't have the medical clearance to do that. And it has been very difficult for me not to be there because I want to be there, you know, for Joe. So I'm going to have to watch remotely. And I'm going to show up for, if he's found guilty, I will show up for sentencing. Because I'll be able to make it a few days, you know? And my health is improving, so by the time that happens, I think I'll be ready, you know? But right now, I can't go there, become sick in the middle of the trial, and then wind up in the wrong hospital. My health is improving, I've lost a great amount of weight, and things are good in my life. But they're not good enough for me to make it through a trial. But it's not because I don't want to be there. But I'll be there in spirit, and I'll watch every minute, and I will be there when he's sentenced. And I will be there if he's sentenced. I will be there anytime he tries to get any sort of parole. I will never stop. Never. I'm committed to this, and so I'll be there in spirit, but I wish I could be there in person.
Is there anything else you want to add?
I hope that, I guess I hope that the Ryan family understands why I chose to do this interview, that I care about them and what they think, but that I had to do this as Joe's mother. And I hope everybody out there understands that. I just hope that they see that Joe was a good person and that he didn't deserve to